Today is day 2 of our pedagogy training. Yesterday, like ma'am said, we had gone through the concepts of competency-based education and why CBSE in the new education policy wants to lean more towards CBE. What sort of changes CBE is trying to implement, be it in the aspect of pedagogical practices, be it in the aspect of the content we learn or we teach the students, or in the aspect of the objective and mainly assessment. So finally, we start with pedagogy, the content, and then the pedagogy and assessment and learning outcomes. We also looked at the various learning outcomes that we have to keep in mind while taking a class or writing a lesson plan. And today we'll be focusing more on the assessment part of it, because all said and done, no matter what pedagogical practices we follow in the class, no matter what changes we bring about in the classroom or outside the classroom, it cannot be fulfilled until we assess the improvement and give the necessary feedback to students. So feedback plays an extremely crucial and important role while assessing a student. So we're going to look at the assessment part of it today in detail. So let's quickly move on to the session. For teachers who will be joining, probably this is the first session for you. These protocols were something that we saw yesterday. So kindly take a quick glance through the protocols of learning together. What are the aspects that we, in this session, in this meeting, we would expect you to maintain or follow? Just a quick glance, kindly go through it. We saw this yesterday as well. Today also we will have breakout room activity, just one like yesterday, so that you can get along with other teachers, discuss, and the more the merrier, like I told yesterday. So when we sit together and work as group, we may have individual ideas, but when we sit together and work as group, the outcome is always better. So we will have breakout room activities today as well with respect to assessment for learning, assessment to as learning, and assessment of learning. The different kinds of assessment we're going to see. We're going to focus more on assessment for learning. So we'll see more into that in the subsequent slides. So these are some practical matters that you need to keep in mind. So kindly be more interactive in the class, like how we were before the session began. You can always share your opinion, or when I give you an idea, like yesterday we spoke about higher order thinking skills. So when we come up with these, you can always share with us, other teachers, what you did in your classroom. That way, if we don't do it in our classroom, that will be a take home for us as well. So it's an open-ended session that we're going to have here, and all of you are free to share your opinion and your ideas. Yesterday, one teacher shared the challenges or the difficulties in implementing this paradigm change in school system. And yes, I agreed, absolutely, it's not going to be an overnight process. It will take its own time, but then, like many of you might have seen already, eventually it is possible and students will come around. Students are like sponges. They can easily observe what we say and what we do. So the way how they can do it, but only by seeing us. They won't really listen to what we say. We all know that. Children don't listen much to what we say, but they definitely observe what we do. So when we start practicing them, implementing them, eventually, gradually, students will start thinking in those lines. They will start analyzing in those aspects that we expect them to do, and it will become a practice eventually. That's what we saw yesterday. And please do share with all of us in the meeting what you feel about any idea or any concept that we are learning in the classroom. Or if you're already implementing it, you can always share with us your ideas. So today's program overview. Yesterday, we looked at learning pedagogy and developing students' thinking skills. We also looked at the various opportunities and the creating test items and the challenges. We saw that as, you actually did it as a Padlet activity. Today, we will be looking at assessment for learning. Mostly, we'll focus on for learning. How can we use the very concept of testing or assessment as a procedure or a process for learning in itself? And how do we implement the AFL, assessment for learning activities, in our day-to-day teaching learning sessions? That's what we're going to see today. And before we, okay, objectives for day 2, to understand what AFL is, to get an overview of the various AFL tools that can be used for teaching learning, to understand the 5 main strategies involved in assessment for learning. That's called the Dylan strategies, Dylan-Williams strategies in AFL. We'll look at those 5 strategies that are very important. And how do we apply these 5 strategies in within our lesson, to identify practical ways of applying these strategies within our lesson to develop the competencies, the various competencies that we expect our students to develop. And finally, to recognize the importance of feedback. What is feedback? Is it just telling students that this is where you need to improve? If it is writing skill, there is no clarity in your writing, there is no sequence in the way you write, I can give them the feedback. But that alone is not feedback. Feedback is constructive. It should be constructive. If I say a student is lagging in something, I should also provide them the means of bettering themselves, to make themselves better. So what do I do when I tell someone in writing skill that you lack coherence or clarity in how you write? Then I need to give the child examples of how to write with coherence and clarity so that he or she can take it forward. Just by giving him the drawbacks is not feedback. Giving him a solution to his drawback is a very crucial aspect of feedback. So we will recognize the importance of feedback, the various kinds of feedback for both the learners and the teachers, as well as the taught. We will be looking at them as well in today's session. Yeah, these are the 3 types of assessments that we all are aware of. As teachers, we have been doing assessment of learning. That happens after every lesson or poem or chapter is completed. We assess the students, or even our year-end assessments or our term-end assessments, summative assessments. All these assessments that we do are assessments of learning after we finish the teaching and learning process. So starting from the right side, assessment of learning, as learning, and for learning. Of learning is assessing the children on what they have learned, their knowledge on whatever they have grasped of the lessons. Assess what students have learned. Students are not directly involved in the assessment process. The teachers are the ones. This is assessment of learning is teacher centric. It's everything done by the teacher. The question paper is set by the teacher. The test items are set by the teacher. Students simply write the answers, submit the paper, and then wait for the results to come, which is practically what we all do at the end of a term or end of an academic year. Certify students' competence. Please give them their marks, grades, report cards. Please certify whether they are competent enough to move on to the next grade. May increase or decrease learners' motivation when we, give them their grades and tell them that they are not good enough. It's almost like telling them you're not good enough. You've scored only 40 out of 100, not enough. So it's definitely going to decrease their motivation. If they are scored centum, yes, it increases. So this assessment of learning can do both. It can be both demotivating as well as motivating. Promotes ranking or sorting. We divide students based on their ranks, A1, A2, B1, B2. We categorize students based on their marks and the grades they score. And of course, it does definitely reveal students' level of understanding, no doubt about it. It does tell us how much students have understood. Less emphasis on improving students' learning. Eventually, it is more like how much do you score, and we compare it with other students' score. This student has scored 99, he becomes A1. You have scored 88, you become B1. So this is more on comparing with other students. That is not the intention of assessment. That should not ideally be the intention. Of course, that's what we are doing. But eventually, that should not be the intention of assessment. Assessment should be assessing the children with their prior performance, not with the performance of someone else. This is where comparative analysis comes and children become competitive, and not in the right way, in the right sense, but competitive in the terms of marks. And emphasizes accountability to meet standards. Teacher assess students' learning. So it is more teacher centric, which is what assessment of learning is, what we've all been doing. A traditional classroom system is what this is. And then moving on to the middle one, assessment as learning. I use assessment itself as a learning tool. Rather than using assessment after learning, I use my assessment itself as a learning tool. That becomes assessment as learning. Assessing students' cognition and their learning, it's extremely important. All this happens during the teaching learning activities. As I'm doing my class, I assess how does a child answer my question. Is he able to present himself properly? Is he able to use proper vocabulary? Is he struggling to comprehend the question? I will do this as part of the teaching learning process itself. I'll be assessing. Students are actively involved in monitoring and assessing their learning. And as and when I assess them, I give them my feedback. Feedback is a crucial factor, and they eventually start learning. They become their own learners. Teachers show students how to do self-assessment. Now it becomes student-centric. Assessment as learning and for learning, the two aspects are student-centric. Teachers provide students with opportunities to practice self-monitoring, self-reflection, self-assessment. I'm just a facilitator. The actual learning is done by the child himself or herself. So that one, it doesn't hurt his ego. Once the child's self morale is hurt, it's really very hard to make him learn any subject. You keep calling a child a failure or see what you've done, look at your performance. Eventually, he'll feel so low in his morale that he wouldn't even do what he once used to do. That's extremely important to make the child understand that self-motivation, self-analysis, and self-introspection is extremely important while learning. It's a continuous process. It's not a year-end or a term-end process. It's a day in and day out process. Teachers guide students in setting learning goals. Students assess their own learning. I'm not going to assess them. Let them do their job. Let them assess their own thing. This is what we do when we do exchange correction or correct your own. Many of us do that, right? After we conduct a test in the classroom, we'll just give them the key points, especially with 9th and 10th, the kind of syllabus we have. We don't generally, and a quick, suppose we have a quick assessment in the classroom, surprise test. We generally give them the key points and then we'll say, if you have covered these key points, give yours of 2 marks, give yours of 3 marks. If you have this one particular key point, or if your grammar conversion of reported speech is all correct, give yours of 1 mark. This is self-assessment. And we need to trust the child that he will assess properly. And that's when he gets that responsibility that, okay, I have the paper that I've written. I'm going to correct my own paper. I need to be honest to myself and I will assess myself in the right way. Or peer correction, exchange correction. We do that as well in the classroom. So most of these we do. It's just the jargons and the proper way. A structured pattern is what I'm doing over here in this session to highlight the structured pattern. Otherwise, all this we all do. All us, we teachers, we have been doing this for all these years. Students assess their own learning, and this will improve the student's learning and motivation. When he becomes his own boss, when he becomes his own teacher, that's when a student starts learning. That's assessment as a learning tool. And finally, we look for assessment for learning, the one in the left-hand side. This is what we're going to focus a lot in today's session, assessment for learning. We assess students' progress and learning needs. What does a child need? In both assessment as learning and for learning, we are just facilitators. And the assessment as learning and AFL, assessment for learning, both go hand in hand. Nothing can be, it cannot be divided. They both go hand in hand. If you notice the key aspects of both of these assessments, they are almost similar. They both go hand in hand. And in both the cases, we are just the facilitators. We take a step back. The entire teaching learning process is student centered. Whereas in assessment of learning, that's not the case. It's still teacher centered. So coming back to assessment for learning, where I use my assessment for the purpose of learning. It is again a continuous process which requires feedback. It's a cycle. I assess the students' progress and learning needs. Students are also involved in the assessment process. So both the teacher and the learner together put their head together and they enter into the assessment process. Descriptive feedback is essential in creating learning strategies. This is very important. As I told in the beginning of the session, feedback is not just telling you lack over here. This is the aspect you need to focus on. You need to improve your vocabulary. Too many spelling mistakes, work on them. You don't have any coherence in your writing skill. There is no clarity. There is no creativity. These are not just the feedback that we have to give. When we give this, we also have to give them a solution. As a teacher, I need to guide my student on how to improvise on the factors that he is lacking, he or she is lacking. If I say you lack creativity, then I'll give him ideas on how we can think. I can give him some websites that help them, especially story writing in class 9. I remember last year when I had the same session, I gave you some tools, online tools to improve the story writing skills, the 5 point or 5 layered some website. I remember where I had that in the session, this associate school session I had. I spoke to you about that, where that website actually gives ideas. It gives pictures, it gives 5 pictures, and asks children to connect the 5 pictures and create a story with a starting line. It gives a starting line, it gives an idea, it gives keywords, it gives 5 pictures. It encourages learners to associate or link the 5 pictures and create a story. So when I do that, my children, they are motivated to think creatively, think out of box. Just by telling them think out of box, they can't. So what am I doing as a teacher to help them, to push them to think out of box or think creatively? If I say you don't have clarity in your statement, I need to tell them how to bring clarity in their writing skill. If I say you don't have coherence in your writing skill, I give them a template, especially for class 10 business letters. We see a lot of children struggling to write a professional letter. We say business letters have to be completely professional. You don't bring your emotions into a business letter. But we see many children, letter of complaint, they talk whatever they feel like in a letter of complaint. So we need to be very cautious in telling them it's a business letter. So behave like a business, think like a business person, keep it to the point, be objective and not subjective, keep your emotions aside. And I say these things, children may understand, but implementing them would definitely be a difficult thing for children. So what do? I give them a template. This is how I would write a letter of complaint. How about you take a look at this template now and write in your own words something that comes up to your mind. First question, I give them a template. The second question, I tell them use this template as a guideline and then write your own letter. That way they have a solid thing to go back to, a solid backup. So giving a feedback is an extremely crucial factor in assessing students and also in the learning process. And feedback has to be constructive and concrete. It has to be supported with some sort of an input from our end, from the teacher's end, that will guide the children and correct them in the eventual subsequent tests and assessments that we have for them. Teachers and students work together to improve students' learning. That's extremely important. It's a collaborative work. No matter what we do, when we do a collaborative work, children eventually learn to do collaborative work among themselves, and that's how teamwork comes up. And that's how a team player is created. As I told you in the beginning of this session, children don't listen to us. They watch what we do. So when we do a collaborative activity in the classroom, they will learn from us and they will eventually end up doing a collaborative work, a teamwork. Even an introverted child will eventually come out, eventually he will come out and he will try to, when we encourage him to do what he is good at, figure out what the child is good at. Some introverted children may not be open to speaking, but they are really good in writing. So we can ask them to always maintain a record of whatever is happening. When we have a meeting, the children have an MOM, minutes of meeting. You're an introverted child, it's okay, you're good in writing, maintain MOM for the class, the discussions that we have. Or when we have a teamwork, maintain an MOM or have a record, written record of what is happening in the team. That way, I'm including even the introverted children who are not very comfortable talking, but they would love to be part of the activity that we are doing, the teamwork. So collaborative work comes from us teachers. That's another reason why I have these breakout rooms, because we have to learn how to be collaborative in order to teach that to the children. So teacher and student work together in improving student learning. Continuous process. Like I said, it's not an overnight process. It is definitely a continuous thing that we have to keep doing again and again. It's a cycle. So as teach, learn, assess, feedback, and repeat. It's a cycle. This will definitely increase the learner's motivation. Even students who are very reserved or quiet or shy and timid, introverted, who don't want to talk, can also be pulled in for some sort of a written work or something that he or she is comfortable with, so that we motivate them. Provide clear learning targets for students. Objectives are very important. Even our session, I begin with the objective of the day, because that will give us an idea of we will be aware of what we have to expect for the next 1.5 hours. If I don't tell you what my objective for today's session is, you'll all be extremely blank. Yes, eventually as the slides go by, you will understand, okay, this is what we're going to do. But to create a clear set goal is always important when we start a task. And that is what we need to set even for students. This, especially for struggling students who find it really hard to score 16 out of 40. Say, of course, this year is going to be 40, next year it's going to be 80. The child finds it hard to score 16. Don't tell him you have to score above 30. Tell him score 16 first, then score between 20 to 25. Set him the doable targets. Only when a target is doable, the child will feel motivated and encouraged when he achieves the target. When the target is too high, the child will just lose his motivation and he will even stop trying. So it's extremely important to set doable targets to improve the motivation, to get the children motivated. Provide clear learning targets for students. Students learn to differentiate good work from weak work. Eventually, when they become their own learners, their own teachers and their own learners, they know the difference. They will learn the difference, and they will try to move from weak to good to better and best. Both teacher and students assess students' learning. It's a collaborative work once again. So today's session will be focusing more on AFL. AOL we are already doing, assessment of learning. So I'm not going to focus more on that. So moving on, are we clear with this? Can I move on to the next slide? Any inputs from your end? Kindly raise your hands or unmute yourself. As I told, I would love to hear more inputs from your end. What you do in your classroom to encourage assessment for learning or assessment as learning. What are the questions or assessments you do during the process of learning? Whatever it is that you do in your classroom, if you can share it with others, it's a learning process for us as well. So that would be great. Moving on to the next slide. What? Yes. Did somebody unmute yourself? Is there anything you would like to say? Okay, let's move on. Hello. Yes.
ஐயோ வேண்டாம்.
If you can kindly please mute yourself. Chitra ma'am, if you can kindly please mute yourself. Thank you. Let's move on. Okay, so what is AFL? AFL is an approach to teaching and learning that creates feedback, which is then used to improve students' performance. Students become more involved in the learning process, and from this eventually gain confidence in what they are expected to learn and to what standard. The targets are set very clearly to students in an assessment for learning. So it's an approach to teaching and learning. It's a pedagogical approach. And the most important criteria over here is, as we all can see, feedback. Feedback is the most important criteria over here. The source is from the Cambridge Community website. So moving on, the purpose of assessment for learning. So before we start AFL, we need to know what is the purpose. Assessment tends to be thought of as something we do after learning has taken place. Assessment of learning. That's what we generally do. However, assessment for learning, with that, we can use activities within the lesson itself to provide evidence of learning. The consistent questions that we ask during the classroom sessions help us to assess children's comprehension skills, help us to assess students' communication abilities. All these competencies that we have to develop in a student can be assessed during the teaching learning activity itself, rather than waiting till the end of the lesson or end of the month to have an assessment. We can do it during the teaching learning activity itself, and that's what is assessment for learning. By doing so, a teacher should be able to continue with the lesson dependent on students' progress. So it becomes a student-centric teaching learning process. When I assess a child's requirement as I learn, I will be able to tweak my learning, the lesson based on my students' progress. For example, let me take a very simple example of Nelson Mandela, Long Walk to Freedom. There may be children who are very much aware of what or who Nelson Mandela is, what did he do in his life, and there may be some children who have no idea about what we are talking. They have no idea what Long Walk to Freedom is. It's a autobiography of Nelson Mandela. Now, when I start asking questions during the classroom, then I will know the abilities of the student, where they stand, and I will tweak my teaching activity accordingly. Probably I can show them a ice-breaking video about Nelson Mandela's inauguration speech, and then I start my lesson. They will get a brief idea of what I'm talking about, and that's extremely important. So that is what assessment for learning does. I can, as a teacher, I can tweak my teaching activities and procedure to cater to the needs of the students, making it a student-centric learning. Involve students more closely in their own learning. They have to be their own teachers. Help them to understand more clearly where they are going. Set a very clear target, what they have achieved so far, give them proper feedback, and what they need to do to progress further. This is also a part of feedback. So set them clear targets, set proper targets for them, give them feedback as they try to achieve the target. Now coming to the 5 key strategies for AFL, you don't have to worry about taking screenshots or noting it down, because I will be sharing the material with you all at the end of the session. Like yesterday's day 1 document, I'll be sharing this with you all as well. Now coming to the 5 key strategies of AFL. First is clarifying, understanding, and sharing the learning intentions. We generally start the lesson by writing the title of the name of the lesson on the board, and then we start asking them questions. So that is clearing, setting a very clear target or objective of the day. This is what we're going to do. Report a speech. We write on the board and we tell the students, we ask them questions. By setting this, we also can ask them their any knowledge, pre-acquired knowledge can also be tested eventually to understand what they have already learned, and again tweak our teaching learning process accordingly. Engineering effective classroom discussions, tasks, and activities that elicit evidence of learning. That must be done during the classroom itself. Ask questions that that give us an idea of how much they already know. For example, when I talk about tenses or report a speech, do they already know what a present perfect tense is? Perfect tenses are something that's a concept that children always struggle in. Perfect tenses, be it present perfect or past perfect, children always struggle. So when I ask them questions and elicit answers from them on their existing knowledge, pre-acquired knowledge, it will help me in tweaking my classroom to teach them about perfect tenses. If they already know what perfect tenses are, I can go accordingly. If they have no idea about perfect tenses and their purpose, then I can start from the basics of tenses. So it will help us teachers as well. And then providing feedbacks that moves learners forward, very crucial. Activating students as learning resources for one another, collaborative and teamwork, peer work, peer feedback or group feedback that we're going to do today as well and tomorrow as well. So we also can have this is something that we need to do within ourselves so that we can implement that in our classroom. Peer feedback, group activity, and group feedback, so that one student can learn with each other, and they can become learning resource for another student as well. And when all the above 4 happen, the last point, activating students as owners of their own learning, will eventually fall in place. So these are the 5 key strategies of AFL, assessment for learning, that we need to understand. This is very important. AFL, all right, but why AFL? Why do we need this to support competency-based pedagogy? So before I move on to answering that question, I want you all to look at the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 competencies, key competencies that we have to develop in our students. These are not learning outcomes, they are competencies. Both of them are extremely different. Learning outcomes, like we saw yesterday, are tangible, measurable aspects, whereas competencies are not measurable after the end of a session. It is something, a skill that the child develops, a life skill a child develops eventually. That's the crucial difference between a competency and a learning outcome. My learning outcome is something that I can see and measure. They are tangible outcomes after the end of every lesson or every poem, like writing something, comparing, contrasting, analyzing. All these are my tangible things that I can see after the end of a session. Those are my learning outcomes that we saw yesterday in day 1 session. Today, I'm going to show you the list of competencies that we have. These are not tangible things that we can test, like collaborative skills. The child will eventually learn to be a team player when we give them activities that encourage them to be collaborative, when we give them activities that make them work in collaboration with other children. It's a competency that I can't test or I can't measure tangibly. The child will eventually learn this life skill. If you notice all these 7 skills, competencies, they're all life skills. They're all skills that the child needs beyond their school system. Communication, undoubtedly. We all know how crucial communication is. A child may be extremely, has high caliber and potential, may be extremely potent in his particular aspect or group. But if he can't communicate, he or she can't communicate, then that remains just that, right? It doesn't come out. So it is not visible to others. Communication is a very crucial and important skill that a child has to learn. Critical thinking, creative thinking, emotional development, to be empathetic, to realize that in a team or in a group or in a society, we can't be self-centered. To be empathetic towards others is an emotional development that the child will learn. Learning to learn rather than being dependent on the teacher for A to Z, trying to be your own learner, learning to learn, learning to make mistakes and then learn from them. And social responsibility, how to grow up into an ethical and a social citizen. These are all the key competencies that our education system has to teach to our students. And these competencies are not tangible like learning outcomes. They are skills that the children eventually learn over a period of few years, many years for that matter. Now, coming to how my AFL can be used to support competency oriented pedagogy. First of all, many competencies, like I just said, are just skills. They're abilities or attributes which will develop progressively over a period of time, say 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. That's how these skills are developed, not overnight. So the AFL approach of where we are going, how far have we got, and what do we need to do next to improve fits in very well. This process of telling them the target, setting a reachable target, a doable target, and then moving on towards the target and giving them feedback. This cycle is very convenient and it fits in very well to achieve these competencies. Secondly, some of the competencies we have talked about are not easy to assess using a conventional pencil and paper test. Like I just said, they are not measurable skills. They are competencies and skills and abilities that can be much observed in action. Put a child in a team, put a child in a group, observe what he does in a group. Is he aloof? Is he nonchalant? Or is he immediately stepping into the activities given to him, taking up the charge and doing the things? This is what we observe. This is what makes them a competitive student. So the competencies are not something that we can assess using simple paper and pen test. This is something that we can assess using observation. So AFL definitely is required. Assessment for learning is definitely required to support competency-based pedagogy. Now, in order to assess them, we have 4 categories of assessment objective. We saw this yesterday also while discussing on the various questions that we asked to students. I told you all, categorize your questions under these 4 categories. Remember, so AO1 is the basic, where the child shows understanding of explicit meanings. For example, explicit meanings, why was the story on Dr. Harriet and the dog Tricky. I'm sorry, what was the owner's name? I forgot her name. The owner, the lady?
Mrs. Pomfrey.
Mrs. Pomfrey. Thank you so much for yeah, Mrs. Pomfrey. Thank you. So if I take that lesson, we can have questions that show that test the students' understanding of explicit meanings. For example, why was the tongue of Tricky rolled out, and why does the author call Tricky as a bloated sausage? Now, this question is very straightforward. It is called as bloated sausage because it had overeaten. It was excessive. The weight, it had excessive weight, and it could not even walk. It could not even stand. And because of that, it lost all the energy, and that's why its tongue was rolled out. So this is something that tests the understanding, the explicit understanding, or understanding students' understanding of explicit meanings, or any particular word, a new word that the child don't has not handled before and is learning it for the first time. Meaning of a new word, vocabulary. These all come under AO1. AO1. Then AO2, show understanding of implicit meanings and perspective. For example, why did the author not share the eggs and other things to, and even the different kinds of beds? It had a morning bed, it had an evening bed and a night bed, it had coats. Tricky was given everything by Mrs. Pumphrey. But then the doctor did not provide Tricky with any of these things. Rather, he made a bed out of a box and made Tricky sleep right next to other dogs. Why did the doctor do this? This is testing the children of their understanding of implicit meanings. What was the doctor's intention, Dr. Heriot's intention in doing this? This is a level higher, understanding. And then comes my AO3, where I comment on the effect of writer's use of language and structure. For example, in the same lesson, if I ask the question, why does the author, the narrator, or Dr. Heriot, why does he say that we were tempted to keep Tricky for a few more days? Writer's use of language. Why does the writer say, the narrator or the author says, we in the surgery were tempted to keep Tricky for a few more days? What is the writer's intention in saying this? Now I'm testing the child's analysis, understanding first of all, then analysis and application. He was tempted because the kind of eggs and wine and brandy that Mrs. Pumphrey sends for Tricky, nothing goes to Tricky. It all goes to the doctor and the people in the surgery. So that is more of a luxury to the doctors and other staff members working in the surgery. So that is why the doctor was tempted to keep Tricky for a few more days. So the child has to understand the humor in that statement. The child should not think the doctor was being selfish or unprofessional. The child has to understand that sense of humor that Dr. Heriot is trying to express in that statement. This is what is understanding, applying, as well as analyzing. The next level in Bloom's taxonomy. And finally, AO4, the highest level of Bloom's taxonomy, which is nothing but creation. Communicate a personal response to text supported by textual reference. I test my students whether they are able to give a personal response to the text. For example, in the same lesson, I can ask a question, or pose a question to the students. Do you think Dr. Heriot was professional by hiding the way of treatment, the kind of treatment he gave to Tricky? He hid the fact that he didn't give any sort of, Tricky did not undergo any surgery. It did not undergo any sort of medication. All it did was have a lot of exercise, just water for 2 days, simple food, but lot of active lifestyle. That's all Tricky needed. And the doctor knew that very well. Although Mrs. Pumphrey was fretting and she was scared and worried about Tricky, Tricky was not sick at all. All Tricky needed was active lifestyle. And the doctor knew that. However, the doctor avoided telling this fact to Mrs. Pumphrey. Do you think it was professional on Dr. Heriot's part to do that? And I ask this sort of a question to the students, they'll start thinking. We will have answers from both the sides. It's an open-ended question. So yes, children will say, absolutely, ma'am, it's unprofessional. It's completely unprofessional to hide the facts from the patient or the owner of the pet over here in this case. Because tomorrow she may roll back to the same thing. She may go back to square one and repeat the same thing again. And Tricky will again get sick. And he will again be hospitalized. It will be a vicious cycle, a never-ending vicious cycle. So it was definitely wrong on Dr. Heriot's part to have, hidden the fact from Mrs. Pumphrey. Whereas some children would say, no, ma'am, absolutely no. The means justify the ends. So some children may say, it's okay. Whatever means we take, as long as the end or the destination is achieved, the objective is achieved, the means justify the ends. So it's absolutely fine on Dr. Heriot's part to have done it. It's not unprofessional at all. He took care of the dog. He resolved the issue of the dog, and the dog is now happy. That's all matters. There are some children who would come up with those sort of answers. So this is my highest level in the Bloom's taxonomy. The analysis, the evaluation, the children are evaluating the behavior of Dr. Harriet. So evaluation, analysis, coming up with their own ideas, creation. So this is how I test and assess my students' thinking skills. See, all these questions I can ask during the classroom discussion itself. I don't have to wait for a term and assessment to do these assessment, these sort of questions, to ask these sort of questions. That's what assessment for learning is all about. I assess the children's knowledge and their thinking abilities during my teaching learning process. And these are the 4 categories of AOs that we have: AO 1, 2, 3, and 4. I would request you all to take a note of these things because our next breakout room activity is based on this. These are the assessment objectives that CBSE is expecting for classes 6, 7, and 8. Since we have teachers handling even 7 and 8 over here, please note, this was last year's, of course. This year, of course, CBSE may come up with a different percentage expected in setting questions that test AO 1, 2, 3, and 4. So under reading comprehension, this is only for reading comprehension. This is from the CBSE website. I've taken the screenshot from CBSE website. And for 9 and 10, this is what CBSE expects us teachers to set the question paper for reading comprehension under these categories. AO1 to be tested 30%, AO2 30%, AO3 20%, and AO4 20%. So 20% of your questions should test the AO4 of students in your reading comprehension section A. This is for 9 and 10.